I think we do have a skills gap it's generational, that this industry hasn't figured out how to get young people in and create a career path for them. Like, I made a conscious decision to go make a career out of this. Stupidly, stubbornly, maybe, but it was, hey, I see a path here. I remember early on thinking, I've got friends that went in different directions and they've got benefits. They've got all these things that I don't think are existent, but I stuck with it. And eventually I've been better for it. And I've gotten all those things that I didn't think I could in this industry.
Less stress, more time, more money. Welcome to the Cashflow Contractor interview.
Martin, do you, I know that you are a pheasant hunter, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Where are you going with this, Khalil? No, what other?
Quail and pheasants.
Quail and pheasants. Any duck hunting?
In the past.
In the past?
Yeah.
Are you, any plans this fall for some hunting going on? Where are you going?
Just up to Nebraska and also into Kansas.
You know what I just saw in Nebraska?
Yes.
You may know. What did I see?
You saw 92,003 people show up for a volley game in the stadium.
Volley game. Come on. Volleyball game.
Oh, I didn't say ball. Volleyball.
No, you didn't say ball.
Yeah, they set a world record.
I just can't imagine how you can watch a volleyball match from a stadium, like the nosebleeds. You're going to be like that. You can't even see the ball, I'm sure.
Well, do you think that volleyball had anything to do with it?
No, I don't.
Actually it did, because they're big time. They're like OU is in softball. They are, 5-time national champions and all this.
Yeah.
So people really support it, but it was a huge party.
It was a huge party.
They pulled it off.
I mean, more people in a stadium than like watching the World Cup final of the women's, just crazy to think about, but interesting. I asked about hunting. I have no idea if this is even close, but our guest has a business called Duckworks. And I got to know, Jacob, where does Duckworks come from? Where does the name come from?
That's one of the first things people always ask. Or really, it's usually second or third, but they ask it. And initially, so before I started Duckworks, I used to write a blog just on my personal website in between, other jobs. And one of my posts I wrote was called Be a Duck. And it was a cheesy acronym that I had put together, a short blog post: be diligent, be urgent, be consistent, and be knowledgeable.
Ooh.
But at the time I was also managing a team of drafters and engineers, and they happened upon to discover, hey, Jacob has a blog and he has this really hilarious post that's really cheesy. And so they circulated internally and they would use it to make fun of me. They were like, oh my gosh, Jacob has a blog. He's a blogger. But what I took from that when I went to start a company last year was, hey, I need a name. I want something original that sticks. And over many years since I wrote that blog post, that was always something that they would remember about my blog. And I thought, hey, it sticks. And so originally it was just going to be Duck Millwork Consulting. And I reached out to one of my best friends who's in marketing. And he said, no, Duck Millwork is terrible. You need another syllable there. He said, make it Duckworks. That'll be perfect. And I said, okay, I got to fill out this paperwork to register my name with the state. And that was really how it started.
Nice.
It's worked out well. I didn't plan it this way, but we have a large team, and ducks just happen to be something that there's tons of, marketing tchotchkes, things around. And so
like the rubber ducky in the background there.
Yeah. We have tons of these now all over my house. My wife and kids collect them, and our team actually love them. So it's
nice.
It's a really easy, marketing thing to get around. And
I'm thinking about all the things you could do with that. Like you could, have different levels of duck gifts for how many years you've been in the company as for the employees.
Yeah.
You could have like different equipment. If you have several pieces of the same type of equipment, you could have different types of ducks for each of the varieties of equipment.
We do a duck of the quarter where we kind of award,
Nice.
our duck of the quarter internally. And we do have one of our drafters does 3D printing, and he made a rubber duck trophy with sunglasses on it that we give out. But yeah, the only downside is that people think we do HVAC too often. So
oh man, I was going to ask that at one point, because Duckworks, I mean, that's what the duct work.
Yes,
right. Well, that's like people always say duct tape.
Yeah,
and it's DUCT.
Yep.
But people have ducks on their, a mallard on the wrapper, and
yeah. Well, yeah, you could literally get like tape that has ducks on it. You could even have like your team meetings in the morning could be quack time. There's a lot. I love it.
It does. ChatGPT comes up with lots of good little marketing things.
I bet. So interesting.
You can also start every meeting by swinging a 2x4 in a circle and tell everybody to duck. That's my contribution, Nelson.
There you go,
Khalil.
So, Jacob, welcome to the podcast, Cashflow Contractor. You have your own podcast. That's why we got this great setup and great audio for you. Thank you for making that easier for our team to edit. Tell us about your podcast and why you even have a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. So yes, I have a podcast we launched earlier this year called Verify and Field, the Millwork Podcast. And I've being a millennial, I've listened to podcasts for many years, and but in the industry, I've worked in the millwork industry now, since I graduated college, so about 12 or so years now, and it's there's not really a lot of content for us. I remember when I first came out of architecture school, and my go-to was, hey, to Google information about my first job, how to use the software, like what types of best practices there are and things like that. And it just felt like it was non-existent. So really all through my career, I've hoped that somebody would create more content. So that was an initial drive. And then starting Duckworks, I had an opportunity to, now being a vendor, like we provide services for the industry. So I spent most of my career working for a handful of different companies. But now being on the supplier side and, being partners for companies, I speak to so many different business owners, different people in the industry, realize really how large this industry is, even though it's, seems non-existent unless you're in it. But once you're in it, it's huge. And so I felt like, hey, there's so many important voices and people that have important things to share. And I really just wanted to start to build that community. And so I decided to launch the podcast and really take that opportunity to start sharing that information. So the real hope is just to create somewhat of an anchor. And I know other people will hopefully follow and create better content than I have. But that was really the initial impetus for it.
Nice. And then you Verify and Field, why that name? Is it to find the people that are in the field doing the work and to verify best processes, best information from them?
It's actually an industry term, so
okay. There
my
we go.
background is drafting and engineering within this field. I come from an architecture background and spent really my whole career in engineering and in millwork. And this is really just in construction in general, but specifically in millwork. On our shop drawings, we're constantly putting dimensions with Verify and Field. And that means that, hey, okay, based on the architectural drawings, this wall should be 12 feet. But until the GC actually builds it, we don't know the exact length for where our millwork is going to go. And so Verify and Field is just like a very common term, or abbreviated VIF. Anybody in millwork knows that. And so it just seemed like a unique term that would catch people's eye. If they know it, they know it.
Yeah.
And it's really just a play on words for that.
I like that. I need to probably use that inside of the work that I do more often.
It's a little bit like saying "not my fault."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Hey, it's on you now, buddy.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's how.
So,
And
go ahead, Martin. What are you saying?
No. And it's like as-built. I don't think that necessarily applies to millwork, but for a lot of systems and stuff, you have the design, you have do in field, whether you verify it or not, and then the as-builts, and a lot of times those are three different things.
Yes, and that is, at least in commercial millwork, that is usually a requirement that millworkers have to provide as-built after the fact to complete out a contract.
Oh, okay.
But really, at that point, it's just contract documents. Nobody looks at that.
Nobody verifies the as-built?
No, unfortunately, that's that is a whole other topic that there are people working on.
There's another one out there that's been used in all kinds of shops called cut to fit and paint to match.
Yeah.
Man.
We'll keep going here.
So obviously I got the verify and field wrong. And I think probably our listeners may have not caught that either, because I don't know that there's a ton of our listeners necessarily in the millwork space. So kind of update us on the millwork space just briefly, and then let's talk about the customers that are inside there. You're in Atlanta, is that right, Jacob?
Yeah, I'm located in the Atlanta area in Georgia.
Okay, so you're in Atlanta. Every couple of years, IWF, the International Woodworking Fair, is in Atlanta.
Yep.
And it is massive. I've been, it's like, if you thought millwork wasn't a big industry, like you said, go there and then you're going to be like, oh, wow. And they're doing some of the coolest things. And it's so diverse as well. Like the Amish population is huge and Mennonite population is huge in the industry. Yep. But then there's also like all over the world, people coming that are, buying massive robots and machines. So it's a huge industry. Tell us a little bit about it. And then tell us about the people that you're serving at Duckworks.
Yeah, absolutely. So the architectural woodwork industry is massive here. And generally, I'm going to be speaking about the U.S. market, which I assume is most of your audience. But for anybody that might be listening, we're talking about U.S. and North America. And it really, if you go into any building, residential or commercial, if you see one cabinetry, that's what people mostly think of, caseware, cabinets, furniture. But like if you go to any lobby of a hotel or a business or a commercial building, or even your restaurants, like our customers, millwork manufacturers, make all of the finished materials and not just wood. So you think the contractor will hire people and they'll do the framing, the drywall, the paint, all that stuff. But anything from the running trim, so your casings around your windows, to wall panels, to your doors and windows, to what's more common, the casework, reception desks, custom fixtures and things like that. So, and there's niches within the industry that focus on these different things. So there's people that focus on hospitality and hotels, and literally all the furniture that you see in hotel rooms to the common areas where you've got the break rooms and the lobby and that type of stuff. There's people who focus on hospitals. So you think all of the hospital rooms themselves, the patient rooms, the front intake areas, like all of that stuff is made by millwork manufacturers. And so generally the way this works in the commercial, there's kind of two subsets, largely residential and commercial. And so if you think about anything that can either be processed out of hardwood lumber or sheet goods on a CNC, whether it be wood or plastic or laminate or phenolic or resin, combined with metals and anything that makes pre-made and manufactured assemblies that get installed in the building, that's millwork. So historically, it was largely woodwork, and it's still categorized under that. But today, it's really anything that architects design that is after drywall, after the general building, that needs to be installed, that is unique to that building. That's what millworkers do. And on the residential side, obviously you have cabinets and kitchens and things like that, but there is a whole high-end market for the similar types of fixtures to be put into large premium houses and stuff as well. And so this industry is essentially a subset of the construction industry. And a lot of the times, people who may be listening to your podcast, if they are contractors, general contractors, they're often having to subcontract to millworkers. So talking about our clients and the people that we serve, they are millwork manufacturers who generally have to first provide what's called shop drawings or submittal drawings to the client and or architect before manufacturing. So usually, just talking about on the commercial side, if a large building is being built or upfitted, a prime contractor will come in and get the contract for the entire project, right? And then they will subcontract all the trades. And one of those trades is, if if your clients may be familiar with the divisions, if you think of Division 6, Division 10, Division 12, are the divisions that would go to millwork manufacturers. So that's your woodwork finishes, your casework, manufactured casework, doors and windows and stuff like that. And so they will bid that out, and a manufacturer will get that contract under the general contractor. And architect does their design drawings just like everything. So your plumber, your HVAC will have to do their shop drawings. And just the same, the millworker will take what the architect has done with design intent. Sometimes it's very vague. Hey, we want cabinets along this wall. Sometimes it's very, very detailed. Hey, we've got this 3D model of this crazy desk we want you to build. And the millwork manufacturers have to take that and say, okay, now we need to put into shop drawings how we intend to execute the design intent. And a lot of times that's where like the difficulty starts for these millwork contractors, because they're taking something the architect has designed that on face value is impossible. Hey, we want to cantilever this huge angled desk. And so now they have to figure out, how do I make this a reality? Do I insert steel here and coordinate with all the other trades around it? But what we do is we facilitate that step, which is, hey, we have to produce shop drawings of what the manufacturer is actually going to make, with details that show not just the outside, but hey, section details, what are the materials and hardware, how's it going to be fabricated. If it's large pieces, it needs to have the ability to be broken apart from the shop and put back together in the field and types of stuff like that. So I know I can go into a lot more detail, but what does that all kind of make sense, at least at a high level?
It does. I want to jump back and ask you about the divisions. What is that?
Okay.
Like standard contract language, and that's categorized into, I hadn't heard the term used that way.
Khalil, are you familiar with what I'm talking about there?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you had mentioned earlier a little bit.
It's the CSI.
Jeff Finian. Yeah, but go ahead.
So I think it's called the Construction Services Institute. There's CSI is the divisions. I'll have to look up exactly what it stands for. But this is in the construction industry in general. There are these standard divisions that contracts are divided up into by types of work. So you have everything from, land clearing and foundations all the way through the end of the building are divided up into divisions. And then the way the contracts are written, the way architects will spec the job out is, they'll actually write, and a lot of times it's boilerplate, but they'll say, hey, Division 6, sometimes they'll say, must go to one of the short list of manufacturers, for example. And they'll say, the architect can even specify, hey, here's the 6 manufacturers that we say are up to snuff to be able to do this work. And then the GC will have to go bid those guys. But it outlines for that division the way the work should be executed and stuff like that.
I've actually seen that book now that you say it. I've had architect clients and they rely on it for so much, get all that language out of there.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
No, excellent. So obviously, you're serving clients in this industry. And I think we can understand a little bit more about how you got into this just from your background. But graduated with a degree in architecture, and then you start working immediately as an engineer. What does your career path look like? Something that we talk about a lot is the evolution of a business owner. And I think we're going to kind of see that. So just kind of get us up to speed about how you got into the industry.
Absolutely. So I went to architecture school, wanted to be an architect largely because people said, hey, you're good at drawing, you're good at math, you're good at figuring things out. This is a path for you. That's kind of how I entered into it. I worked construction in high school and a little bit in college, and I really honestly just wanted to build things. I like to figure things out. I love seeing stick-built homes go up. And I worked as a framer for a little while in construction. But by the time I got to the end of architecture school, I was a little bit jaded of what architecture really was versus what I thought it was. And I really wanted to be more hands-on. I spent some time as an intern architect and realized, hey, I'm drawing these houses, but I'm never seeing them being built. And a lot of the stuff we were working on, I was in a small architecture firm, was, clients hire you because the building department tells them they have to meet code. They don't really want your help as an architect. And so I graduated college. I got my first job, and I saw a listing actually for drafting for a door and window millwork company. So I said, I know AutoCAD, I've done shop drawings, I can do this, and I know a little bit about woodworking. And they hired me. It was a very small upstart millwork company that made actually hurricane rated doors and windows. And so this is another very niche part of this industry, but for homes on the coast, you actually have to have hurricane rated doors and windows called design pressure and impact rated. And this is where they take the doors and test them and shoot 2x4s at them to make sure that if a hurricane comes through, they're going to survive. So I started out doing their shop drawings. And when I wasn't doing that, I was learning how to work on the shop and fill, that void. And I learned how to run a joiner and planer, mill lumber from rough lumber. And over 2 years there, eventually was supervising that shop, making all the radius and elliptical doors and stuff like that. I realized though, hey, I really this is great. I've learned a lot, but I really want to get back towards the design and leadership. I don't want to, lose fingers, frankly. And so I just took a job at a millwork shop that does more casework and millwork, what I spent the rest of my years at companies doing as an engineer. And that was actually where I was first introduced to a software called Microvellum, which overlays in AutoCAD and kind of develops a parametric library of products. But I got exposed to working directly with the architects there, engineering jobs, going and meeting with the client and solutioning and figuring out, which is really what I learned to do in architecture school, was how do you solve design problems? And really it was, how do you understand from your client, not what they're thinking their solution is, but what is their problem statement? And a lot of times they present to you a design problem with their proposed solution that they've seen somewhere. Hey, I really want this type of house, or I want this type of thing. But what you're trying to get at is, okay, what are you trying to solve? And I can actually probably help you with a better solution than you're aware of, possibly. And so that was really what I started to explore, was in millwork. We're creating solutions, and an architect or a client or a GC is saying, hey, we need a reception desk that looks like this. And we're trying to figure out how to meet this design intent of the client, but we're not the experts on how to construct this type of thing. You guys are. And so I took that and was like, great, I love this. I'm going to take that rough draft and figure out how can we construct this creatively and still meet the design intent. Very quickly though, I started managing a department and helping develop other companies' departments and using that software Microvellum to streamline processes and use it to build libraries so that more entry-level people could be drafters and engineers without having to have the expert knowledge that, experienced millworker has about how we constructed things. And over time, I eventually got brought on board to an upstart called USA Millwork that was acquiring other manufacturing companies with the goal of being a nationwide millwork company with multiple manufacturing locations. And so that was actually my last role before starting Duckworks. Was my job as VP of engineering there was to integrate 5 millwork manufacturing locations from an engineering and design standpoint. And I really there started to learn a whole lot about the challenges our industry faces with serving different markets. So a lot of companies in this industry really operate in a single city or a single state in a single market. But for example, California, you have to account for earthquakes and seismic and things like that we don't have to deal with over here on the Southeast. And so there's different code requirements that you have to think about. There's different just trends that happen. And so having to account for those from a nationwide standpoint, as well as being able to talk to different machines, different people, and just the overall change management that goes into integrating teams from different regions, from different shops with different legacy processes and systems, really opened my eyes to a new set of problems. And so that's really the start of what Duckworks was initially. Was, okay, how can I take what I've learned over my career so far to help other people in similar positions to overcome these engineering and drafting bottlenecks that they have.
So you find the pain point for these people in the millwork industry, and you create Duckworks. But obviously, you shared a little bit about your background. What was it like outside of the industry aspect of this, but more to the entrepreneur level? What was it like jumping out on your own and creating Duckworks?
Yeah, so I think I always had a desire and a hope that eventually in my career I would, start a business or, go out on my own some way. Because once you get into some level of leadership within organizations or within companies, you're always, unless you are the owner or CEO or president or kind of like that top level, your middle management, really, you're starting to have to grow and learn and figure out how to manage other people, but also how to manage up. And how do I meet the needs of the business, understand the needs of the business? How do I support my manager, my leaders, goals and needs and what they're trying to do, make them look good, make them successful. But at the same time, you're struggling with, hey, well, what if this was the goal instead of, or I have this idea, but I'm not the one calling the shots. But I always thought like, oh, that's way later in my career, and this industry is I'm still very young for this industry. I'm 35, and in millwork, I'm a baby. So I never thought, hey, at 34, I'm going to be starting a business or whatever, 33. But I fortunately over my career have had a lot of people that have invested in me and saw potential, and what ultimately was the start, I guess, was USA Millwork shut down, more or less. They basically sold off the business units to new owners. So those companies still exist. Just my role as an integrator at the USA level went away. And so I had a decision to go get another job, or do I take this opportunity? And my wife, my former boss, many people that I work with were like, hey, you have a lot to offer the industry. This is your opportunity. And so that was motivation. At the same time, at USA Millwork, we had started building this team in Bolivia. And so I had always, as I moved from company to company, most companies in this industry will outsource some amount of their drafting needs. And usually it's for two main reasons: schedule and cost. And so one, cost, hey, if I can get the shop drawings done cheaply and not clog up any of my internal resources at the same time. A lot of times an owner or sales guy will sell a job and they'll say, hey, yep, we can get you shop drawings in 2 weeks. They will outsource that to one of the many companies out there that do that. Most of them are overseas, and say, hey, we'll just get CAD drawings done real fast. I know it's a fixed cost because I got a price up front, and they can turn them around in a week or 2 weeks, right? So cost and schedule. But you're sacrificing quality right up front generally. And a lot of times the way millwork companies go about that also is a big reason, not just because those companies are bad at what they do, because it's usually the millwork companies are basically bypassing all their internal processes just to get a document to put in front of the client. And so when I was at USA Millwork, I said, hey, we have a need to solve both those problems, cost and schedule, but I don't want to sacrifice quality to do it. So can we create our own team to solve this problem? And so that was really how we started staffing in Bolivia. Is our CEO at the time had a really good business school friend that is back in Bolivia now, and said, hey, we can hire architects and very educated, skilled people that you guys can train in millwork. And so in the beginning of 2021 was when we hired our first person. And by the end of 2022, we had, at the end of 2021, we had about 17 or 18 people that were just doing shop drawings for us. And I worked with my team to train them in our processes. So fast forward to USA Millwork, selling off the business units, and me deciding what to do next. I said, well, we've already invested and trained in these people, in these skill set, and they don't have a client anymore. I don't have a job anymore. I know I can go sell to other companies the same thing we were doing at USA Millwork. That was really that. And then parallel to that, I said, hey, I would like to try and consult and help other millwork companies do what I was doing as an engineering manager, an engineering leader in one company at a time. I think I could help many companies with what I've learned. And so I kind of started those things in parallel, and it just, naturally was the companies that were helping do shop drawings overlap very heavily with the companies that I'm helping consulting. And that was really the initial formation of Duckworks, is like, hey, this is one company that we can merge these two things to really help millwork companies eliminate their design and drafting bottlenecks.
Yeah. So do you think, obviously you were kind of forced into, maybe forced isn't necessarily the right word, but a series of events happened to basically push you into Duckworks.
Yep.
And do you think that would have happened without that happening? And how soon, if so, do you think it would have happened? Were you ready to kind of go out on your own at that point? Or do you think it would have been a little bit later?
I definitely, I am and was very fortunate to have opportunities and have people in my corner that were coaching me and motivating me. Like I said, my former boss and CEO, and also, who I consider a mentor. And then I also have business partners now in this, so people, don't see them, but I'm very fortunate. One of them is a Harvard Business School grad. And so from an accounting and a finance and a business strategy standpoint, I have a lot of people that are very much smarter than me, much more experienced. So I would not say I was ready.
Yeah.
I definitely wasn't ready, but I felt that, hey, if I have these people in my corner, these people are as resources, I'd be dumb not to leverage that. But there was a very fun turning point conversation I had, because I accepted a job right away and thought in my head, I was thinking just on my own resources, hey, there's only so far I can go as an engineering manager in the millwork industry. And if you search engineering manager on any job board, you're not going to find anything really related to millwork. You're going to find software engineering manager. You're going to find a lot of things, right? So in my head, I was like, okay, how do I pivot if I need to join another industry one day? Like, I still have a lot of career ahead of me. And so I accepted a job as a COO of a small millwork company, which was a great company, would have been a great opportunity. It was close to home, but that was me operating out of like, hey, this is a safe decision. I'm, take care of my family. But I had a conversation with one of my former bosses, and he said, look, you already have an insurance policy. You can go get a job as an engineering manager and pay your bills and support your family at any company in the US. You might have to pick up and move, but you know that you're not going to be unemployed. But you have an opportunity now to bet on yourself. And he said, don't go buy a second insurance policy, which what that meant was I was trying to gain experience and say, okay, this engineering thing doesn't work out. If things don't work out in this job as COO, I could go be a COO in some other industry. But he was like, hey, don't be an idiot. Like, you're smarter than you think. You have more to offer than you think. Worst case scenario, you'll go get another job if this doesn't work out, but you have people and opportunity right in front of you and people supporting you in doing this. So it definitely I wouldn't have done it on my own accord. I don't think at that time. I'm very grateful that I did now. But yeah, I think that it was having the right people around me that were coaching me and supporting it.
Man, so interesting. And, there's always something in a story that can be glanced over in terms of how you get started and the people that help you go along and give you the courage to do it. So thanks for sharing that. So let's go back to Bolivia, because obviously you've been able to recruit and, retain a pretty large team, it sounds like, over in Bolivia. I'm not sure if everyone stayed on or not, but what's it like managing global talent from Atlanta, Georgia?
Yeah. So I have a great team, and we were very fortunate that we ultimately started this team, like I said, with my previous company, right?
Right.
So I think a lot of people will look and say, man, you've built a team of 50 in a year and a half, and it's really more like 3 years. But it has its own challenges. But what I learned at USA Millwork was I was VP of engineering for 5 facilities, and across those 5 facilities, we actually had a staff of 85 that I was responsible for. And by time COVID came, we had gone fully remote. And so I had 85 people, and by the end, they were spread across 22 states. So from that regard, it's not much different than what I'm doing now. If anything, I've got less people. Remote is remote. The important thing is that, we from the start have Bolivia is Eastern time zone. So, we're not dealing with somewhere over, in Asia or somewhere that we're on like a 12-hour time difference. And everybody is English fluent. We very much we're adamant about that from the start to be able to have them truly integrate. So with those two factors in place, it's really not so much of being international as being remote. And then we do have an office and we have leadership in place down there. I go down 3 or 4 times a year, which is huge because it still is a big need to meet in person and develop those relationships. Yeah. And we've actually brought people to the US to visit and work with clients and stuff. So, but I really leveraged what I learned just managing a remote workforce in the US and a lot of those things, which is, one is to understand that like there's a limit to how many individual direct reports a single person can effectively manage. So there's no way I could be directly managing all 50 of our people, right? I have a leadership team below me and it trickles down from there, right? And understanding like what are my strengths, what are the things that I really offer that are the most value that I can do and delegate everything else. And that's a daily struggle because as you're growing a business, you don't really know what the business needs or what you need to hire for, what tasks you need to do. So I've always been, and this is kind of my engineering background of like, hey, I do something until I figure out a process and then I find somebody to train to repeat that process, then I can delegate it to. And so there's been many phases of that in the starting of Duckworks. And early on, I was talking to every client. I was managing every project. I was running the schedule and in Excel and in planner systems, and so as things evolved and we grew, it was okay. I can't be the one scheduling everything and I need a better solution than Excel. And so we, invested in Smartsheet, which I had experience with, and we created a real system and I offloaded that to a manager and said, hey, you're responsible for the schedule now. And here's what that means. And then having weekly meetings on that. And then it was, okay, I can't be the one doing all estimating sales. And it was, again, how do I create a process and then teach somebody else that now that is their job? And so that is, in my mind, that is like, that's entrepreneurship. That is business. That is just the daily thing that we do, right? Is, okay, what am I doing that I could not be doing that's taking up time from something more value add that I could do? So lately it's, okay, I need to be spending more time in front of our clients and in front of our existing clients, making sure that we're adding the right value for them, which means I'm traveling, which means I can't be doing something else that I'm doing. So evaluating that constantly is really what the last year and a half has been.
I have 2 questions I've written down. In light of the fact that it offers your customers a flexible capacity, which I think you really call schedule, beneficial cost, I've heard some numbers and it's beneficial, and quality. What is the reason? What pushback do you get? It sounds like a no-brainer. There is no such thing, but anyway, it sounds like a no-brainer. Why do people say nope?
So a couple reasons, but yes, the primary value adds that we offer obviously are flexibility in schedule and cost. But really what we try to add that nobody else in the market has is that we really try to help our clients actually improve their processes from a quality standpoint. And so generally, if we're not successful, either if a client doesn't want to try us, a lot of the times it's because they're worried about. So there is a dynamic in general in this industry where engineers really want to do all their own project from start to finish. They don't like to work behind somebody else. They don't like to work in front of somebody else. And a lot of that is because of, I mean, if you imagine generally they're working in CAD files, CAM files. And so if you're working behind somebody and they don't work the way you do, neither of you guys are following any kind of higher level processes that your business has agreed upon, then a lot of times you're just redoing what they've done because they didn't do it the way you would have done it. I mean, it's almost like if you're a framer and you're picking up today with a wall half built by a different framer the day before, and they do things differently. That's what it's often like in CAD. And unfortunately, most companies don't have an engineering leader that both understands the technical implications of that and the management and change management or authority to say, hey, this is the way that all of us at this company are going to do these things. And so what we struggle with clients is if they don't have process in place in their engineering departments or a decision maker who understands whether they do or not, it's very difficult for us to then come in and give them a result that is usable, that they're happy with. And usually it's an owner or somebody who's not in engineering making decision from a cost standpoint or a schedule standpoint to hire us. And then 3 months down the road, their internal engineers are then looking at what we've done and having to engineer it to production and saying, this is terrible. We hate this. This is awful. We're having to work behind them and we had no say in how they did what we're doing. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but usually it's that internal pushback from our internal customers that aren't the decision makers.
Yeah. Well, you kind of mentioned something that leads to my other question, which is a little disjointed, but do you do shop drawings?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So there is a creative element in that, an engineering element. We're going to cantilever this huge desk and you're going to have to look at material strengths and put an I-beam in there or whatever else you got to do. There's that creative. I'm just amazed. I'm just always amazed when you can outsource creative because that's, unless you found a way to systemize creativity.
So, and that is the biggest obstacle we encounter, is that too many people leave everything up to creative. And the reason is because if it's truly creative, meaning that there is no system to it, there's no logic to it, it's just, what solution did this engineer come up with? I'm never going to come up with the same thing as another person. So that's generally how most mill workers will work. That's how a lot of people will work, right? Is, hey, I have a really skilled engineer. We trust him. We trust that what he comes up with, where he's going to work through and make it go through the shop. He's going to go talk to the lead fabricator and they're going to agree on a method, right? That's great. The problem is when you try to scale a business, think about anything. Imagine if you thought that way about accounting and you said, well, I don't know how we're going to do our taxes this year, but I know that Tammy in accounting is creative. If you suddenly try to change accountants, she's going to be like, wow, your last person was really creative in a different way than I would, right? And that doesn't necessarily
creative bookkeeping is not a good thing.
Yeah, and the same thing with fabrication, right? If you were like, oh man, this cabinet assembler was really creative with how he decided where those dowels should go. And it's hard for people to find the logic. And so that also translates to, it's very difficult for you to hire and train people and teach them, because what you're saying is the only way you can really be good at this is if you've done it for 40 years and you've had the experience that I've had, which is what informs my creative. All of that to say that we often encounter that with clients where they're like, hey, we've got this really custom thing that needs to be figured out. And so the problem comes is if we're creative in a vacuum and then we present what we came up with to the client and it's not what they would have wanted to do. So the important part is that we work with our clients and understand, hey, who are the creatives, decision makers in your business? And we want to make sure that we pull them in to inform us and discuss, hey, here's some options that we creatively come up with, but we need to know from you as a client, hey, are you going to build this in a way that is mostly CNC machine? Or do you have guys on the bench that like to do certain operations? Are you installing it yourself? Are you subcontracting that out? What type of machinery do you have? Do you have V-grooving abilities? There's a lot of factors that we just have to ask the right questions and talk to the right people in our client's organization to then get them the result they need. And a lot of times that's the coaching of our clients is really the differentiator for us, because our competition, a lot of that, you can go get outsourced drafting, and the way it's generally going to work is you send them the architectural documents and the scope, and then a few weeks later you get CAD files back, and they may or may not be what you want or need. And what we're trying to do is actually work with you as a partner and say, hey, look, we're trying to be the foundation that your entire organization, because these shop drawings are what the entire organization uses from there going forward. Nobody looks at the scope anymore. Nobody looks at the architectural drawings. The shop drawings we produce get updated with field dimensions later that says, okay, this is now how long that wall is. They get updated with revisions from the architect. They get updated with accurate materials. And then engineering releases those to production as here's what you're actually going to make. And so we want to make sure that they're not restarting. And you mentioned, I think this is a good time to segue into, you asked before we started recording the difference between drafting and engineering. And so those are terms that are generic outside of millwork, but within millwork, there's many different terms for them. But generally what that means, drafting is everything related to CAD of shop drawings from when a job is awarded to the millworker to approval from the client of those drawings is the way, it generally is. So meaning we're producing drawings of what we're going to make that tell you what it's going to look like, the materials and stuff. But within the millwork organization, a lot of times that goes to a separate team that are the engineers, that are the ones who actually do the figuring out of making cut lists, cut bills, CNC programs of actually how the shop is going to manufacture that. And unfortunately, a lot of the times, those drafters don't have the same experience and knowledge or process standards that the engineers do. So they might, and I'll see this for years and years and years, they'll draw things that engineers say, we don't actually build it that way. So after they get the drafting done, the engineer will say, yep, that's wrong. We're going to change it and use this material. We're going to change it and fabricate it this way. And so those internal structures that are just inherent to our client that we don't have control over do affect our success working with them.
No, I thank you for that. I mean, it sounds to me like it's very much building a relationship and learning each other over time.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I've found. Yeah. And what we've tried to differentiate is, leveraging my experience and being here to be able to communicate and speak our clients' language. I was in their position. I was the engineering manager, basically battling my owner saying, no, we don't want to outsource this because we're going to get bad quality. And so now I'm speaking on the other side of that, like, hey, here's why you should work with us. And I understand your struggles and we can help work through that.
In a prior conversation, you and I talked about a couple of ways to work with you. And one is to hire a dedicated remote employee who part of your company. The other is task-based or project-based. Yep. And if you're project-based, can you speak a little bit about the two? I have a number of millwork clients, and I think this sounds like a good idea, but I've never cut a board in my life. And so the weight, but on a project base, can you accumulate that experience so that you understand what they want? I mean, is that a case of interview and understand?
Yeah. So generally, we work two main ways, as you mentioned, what we call project rate or long-term or full-time. And so project rate is what people in this industry are mostly used to. Like, hey, you can go outsource drawings. And it's similar to a lot of other things where, hey, here's the scope I need. Give me a price and a schedule. And so that is our most common way we start with clients is they say, hey, we don't know if this is going to work, but we have a project that we're willing to try you guys out on. We have time. And so that's usually how we start is we will actually take and give them a free quote, free estimate. And we will, just like they estimate, we will estimate scope items But we do it by asking questions. One, how do you guys do your shop drawings? What software do you use? How do you organize your drawings? Meaning, are you going to organize scope by rooms, or do you like to put like items together? Because different manufacturers organize their drawings differently, but that informs how we're going to price the job and how we're going to do the work for you. But once we engage that way, we have clients that'll just stay that way. We're there as their overflow capacity. And generally, we will aim to keep our same internal people always with that client. So there's consistency. We document internally and kind of create drafting standards for that client. Most companies don't have documented standards. And that's what I've done at every company as an engineering manager, is actually documented. Here's our drafting standard. Here's the block we use for labels. Here's how we lay things out on a page. A lot of experienced engineers were like, I don't need you to tell me how to do that. But for us to be consistent, it matters. And so we will document that internally and kind of create a client profile of that customer, so that no matter if it's a month or 6 months in between the last job and this one, we have that as a reference to say, this is how this client operates and what they expect. So that's generally how we'll start with clients. And then what happens is, a lot of times it'll work great and they'll say, hey, we actually have a lot of work, or we consistently this is a bottleneck for us. So the first way we try to augment is, as I mentioned before, there's a difference between drafting and engineering, but a lot of times the people who do those tasks are the same people in a small company. And so their bottleneck comes that they're trying to keep the shop busy, which requires engineering, but they're also trying to keep the client happy, which means producing shop drawings. And so if an engineer is working on submittals, they're not feeding the shop. And so that becomes the first struggle a shop is trying to figure out. It's like if you have an assembly line and you're constantly pulling your saw operator to do another task. Every time he stops, you're clogging up that assembly line. And so what we say is, hey, let your internal people just do engineering and let us do all your submittals to get through this bottleneck period. And so we don't have to know everything about getting exact. You have a layer, a filter internally that even if what we submit, something maybe isn't exactly, you have time and schedule, and you have that internal person with more institutional knowledge in your organization that can filter what we've done. Also provide us feedback. So say we draw a job, 2 months later, they're engineering it and they say, hey, actually, we would have rather you use this detail. Great. Give us that feedback. We'll document it. We'll use that for the next time. And so a lot of times then what happens is we'll graduate to our full-time engagement, where they'll say, hey, we want to keep this going and we just need constant capacity. Can you give us 1 or 2 drafters? And they pay a fixed rate per month to just have those people stay full-time available for them. So what that does is, again, it's a controlled cost with low commitment. You're not hiring an employee that you have, all of the overhead and burden costs related to that. But 2, you have them dedicated, meaning like, I don't have to, a lot of times when you're dealing with an outsourced partner on anything, you're having to plan very far ahead. Okay, I know that I'm going to have to get this project to them. I'm going to have to plan time to get it back from them, put it through our internal systems, whatever that is. Having a dedicated resource, now you're able to say, okay, I know what I'm going to have you do tomorrow, but I don't know the next day, but I can determine that between now and then, and I can change what they're working on as needed, just like an internal resource. And that gives them the flexibility to know, okay, I can go sell this job knowing what capacity I have available, as opposed to trying to sell it on a gamble and then find out if I can go get capacity.
Love it. Another quick question specific to, I'm thinking of people, but if I'm using the words right, shop drawings that you're going to send back to the client, and then the submittals,
Mm-hmm.
and then the actual engineered drawings that you're going to build.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do them on the same software? Because I know some people do not.
Some people do not. So a lot of people might use Cabinet Vision for their engineering, and they might do their shop drawings in AutoCAD. That is one of our biggest things. So we mostly work with microvolt clients, and microvolt overlays in AutoCAD. And so part of our value add is that if you use microvolt, we're going to draft in microvolt in your library so that what we're doing, providing for you, isn't just submittal drawings. It is going to be your fabrication drawings as well, and your engineering drawings. And so a lot of times, we encounter a client, we start working with them, and they're at that stage of like, hey, we do submittal drawings over here in this software, and then engineering over here. And our goal is to help, align those things and either get them to where they're both the same, or at least we can make the transition between the two more
really
seamless.
easy.
Yeah.
So, could you describe a day in the life of somebody who's working with one of your folks down there? I mean, are they talking every day? Probably not, but
yeah. So that is honestly, one of our goals is to communicate as often as possible and daily with our clients. So if we're actively working on a project, we assign a team lead that is the lead point of contact. They're actually working on your job. They're responsible if we have multiple drafters on that job to scale capacity, that everything goes through that team lead. And so if there's questions, usually it starts with the kickoff. Hey, you awarded us a job, or we're going to start this. We tell you, hey, we can start this date. We will schedule a kickoff meeting with that client. And so usually it might be combined with their internal kickoff. A lot of these companies will say, hey, we're awarding this job, we're going to schedule an internal kickoff. And that's where you go over the scope. We discuss schedule, all that type of stuff. But we will have our team lead come prepared. They've already reviewed all the stuff, and they have a list of questions. A lot of the stuff is questions like we talked about. So we understand, hey, I see this really custom fixture. Here's how we might detail it, but we need to know from you these things to make sure that we detail it correctly. So we try to come prepared with as many questions as possible. And then daily, if there's updates, we'll submit RFIs to the client in a way that they can ask the client if needed, or just respond with answers. We use a software called Bluebeam. So we're constantly feeding drawings for review. And so that if your internal PM or engineering manager who's working with us doesn't get to, the final day before everything's due, and they have 100 pages to review all at once. And so we're trying to daily feed them details, and also so that maybe there's a repeated detail, we want to review the first one and get it right before we copy it a bunch of times. So it is almost daily communication, learning from the client, hey, how can we help you manage us better? And how can we, but also get on a cycle that is, tolerable to be successful on this project, and try to avoid surprises and stuff.
Well, I've got more of a question that's almost even, we can kind of wrap up on this. I know we're almost running out of time here, but as we think about your business model and your internal structure, I want to kind of open up the conversation to the whole industry of construction, not just millwork, and kind of the trends and the direction you think things are going. You've talked about how you were really young for your generation, or for your industry, and there's a new generation coming in. But you've also talked about global talent and how that makes up a large part of your company. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the direction of construction in general, and what global talent, what role global talent will play in the construction industry as a whole going forward. You mentioned that, remote employees are remote employees. It doesn't matter if they're in Atlanta or Oklahoma or New York or Bolivia or somewhere else in the world. Where do you see things going and for the general construction company out there, and how do you think they're going to utilize global talent going forward?
So global talent is in itself a massive industry, and it's already for many years been being leveraged in software development, and in tech support and phone support, and lots of industries have been leveraging it for many, many years. But in the construction industry, we tend to be, a decade behind all the other industries on adopting new innovations and things like that, especially when it comes to technology. And I think a lot of it stems from, especially here in the US, this kind of apprehension about offshoring work in general, losing jobs and stuff like that. And what I would say is that I think that the mentality of that it has shifted, is shifting, but needs to shift in our industry more. And so, like, from what we do, right, we have people in Bolivia that are doing shop drawings for US manufacturers. And so there are some people that would say, hey, you're taking jobs that could be going to US engineers, for example. But at the same time, there is a huge shortage of that specific talent in the US. Like there are just not enough people, young people entering this industry, specifically in these skilled types of tasks like engineering and drafting. And so my fear and what, a lot of the motivation for us is that I don't want to see US manufacturing go away, US construction go away, right? And so what we're doing is hoping to support millwork manufacturers continuing to be successful from a profitability standpoint, from a cost standpoint, from a, being able to keep doing what they do, right? And so I think if you look at more holistically, what is it that we do in the construction industry? And then within that, what are the high value tasks, functions that are important that somebody locally in your office, somebody on your job site does, right? There's things that just can't be not done there. Outside of that though, what functions can be supported elsewhere and actually maybe in a better way? Like there are people that have the skills and talents that you need and are more cost effective and actually, more trained in these things. And so I think if you kind of open your mind and start to think about it that way, there's creative ways to do this. I mean, virtual assistants is a thing that's been around for a long time. And so it's how can you as a business owner in this industry creatively problem solve, like looking at all the stuff that your people do, and are there functions that you just consistently struggle to hire people to fill? And then thinking about those things, okay, if I didn't struggle to fill this role and instead I had an abundance of talent for this role, what would that mean for my business as a whole? Would I be able to grow revenue? Would I be able to take on more jobs, which in turn means hire more people just in other roles? So I think that is a big thing that I think still it's a mentality shift. And there's always, certain politics and things here in the US that drive that. But I think if people really take a step back and just look at the big picture, we can do a lot with it that, I'm not the only one thinking of this. And I think there's things I haven't thought of before. Outside of that, I think we do have a skills gap it's generational that this industry, hasn't figured out how to get young people in and create a career path for them. Like I made a conscious decision to go make a career out of this. Stupidly, stubbornly, maybe, but it was, hey, I see a path here. I don't know. I remember early on thinking hey, I've got friends that went in different directions and they've got benefits. They've got all these things that I don't think are existent, but I stuck with it. And eventually, I've been better for it. And I've gotten all those things that I didn't think I could in this industry. So I think if you're a business owner or you're a leader and you're saying, hey, nobody wants to work, I can't hire people. One, consciously creating a path so that it's not just stopping at that entry level role you're trying to fill today. You need a pipeline and you need to give those people a path to something more. They have to be able to imagine, where am I going to be when I'm 40, 50, 60? Am I going to be able to fund retirement? And am I going to enjoy my job for 30, 40 years? And beyond that, then as a business, what could me approaching these types of problems differently than I've done so far open up for my business? If I outsource this thing, because we are a creative industry, because we are a craftsman driven industry, there's a lot of ego and a lot of I can never outsource that because they're not going to do it as good as me. And if you go to any other industry, especially manufacturing, it's manufacturing, it's process, it's system, it's checklist, it's quality control, and everything is regimented and there nothing is sacred. And so I think there's got to be a balance of that, but you have to define for you guys what is sacred and the stuff that's not. Truly find the most cost efficient, best solution for just that task.
Man, so good, so true. I think that mentality needs to be embraced across the industry, and there's so many ways to use global talent that people are just leaving out on the table in the construction industry. So I appreciate your thoughts, and I think that'll continue to be a hot topic going forward for our industry. Man, Jacob, this has been so much fun. I really appreciate you joining us for the Cashflow Contractor, and so much to take away from what you're doing inside the millwork industry. And I think we've already mentioned your podcast, Verify in Field. Sorry, I got the meaning behind that wrong, but I'm sure that it's great for your industry as well, and that people recognize that immediately. We've also mentioned Duckworks several times. Your website's Duckworks MW for millwork.com. We'll have that in the show notes. We'll have your podcast in the show notes as well. Where else can people connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Duckworks MW, everything's there on our website. You can find me on LinkedIn, Jacob Edmond. I'm very active on there. We have, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. But yeah, if you have any questions, or you guys are, you're a millwork owner, you're struggling with this and you're saying, hey, I know I have this problem, I'm not sure about outsourcing, shoot me a message. I'd love to jump on a call and just talk through it.
Look into it. Don't self-deselect.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been great.
Absolutely.
For the millwork side of it, and also just your story, and great to meet an entrepreneur who's into it and maybe over the first hump a little bit.
Yeah, I hope so.
And enjoying it. So
thank you guys for having me, and thank you guys for what you guys do with this podcast. I think it's extremely helpful and valuable for our industry.
Really appreciate it.
I don't know how much value they're getting from us, but it's people like you that make it possible. So thanks, man. We'll catch up with you again another time.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Cashflow Contractor. Check out our website in the show notes or visit thecashflowcontractor.com.